Hi, everyone, and a really warm welcome to this session in the EMCC Global Providers Summit. It's so great to be with you here today. I'm based in the UK, and right here is 10:30 in the morning, and I'm not sure where you are all from. So if you'd just like to drop into the chat, quick hello to everybody else who's here and mention which location you're joining from, that would be absolutely brilliant, and welcome from around the world. It's a real privilege to be with you here today. I was right at the beginning of this week joining this EMCC GPS, and it's just great to connect with you all. And I recognize a couple of names in the session today that were here right at the beginning. So I hope you've been enjoying the whole week, and this session is going to be absolutely wonderful. It's my real privilege to be the person to get to introduce Karen Bryce. I've known Karen for several years and worked closely with her. And as I have managed to do ever since I first met her, really, she's put in a huge amount of effort, drawing on her many years of experience and natural abilities. And then I'm swooping in at the last minute to take all of the credit and say how wonderful we are as a team when it's all really about her. She knows so much about leadership and has a really powerful role working across lots of organizations in terms of their formal governance structures, and is a really skilled coach alongside that. And so that little mix of all of those skills, she's got something that's really great for us today. I know I was here with her last year and I managed to introduce her with a poem. And I have not written a poem today for Karen, but I can say she's a wonderful person. It's a real privilege to know her. You're going to have a great time. So can we all stick our cameras on so we can see each other and just wave your hands and clap your hands as a great welcome to her. And I'll hand over to Karen for her to deliver her content.
Thanks, Sam, so much. I am so grateful you haven't done another poem, because number one, the first thing that hit me last year was, how the heck do you follow that? And number two, I was nearly in tears. I know I wasn't the only one either. So morning, everyone, and a very big welcome from me to this session. This session is an interesting session for me, given that it's a new subject area. I was talking to Nicola earlier on saying that I've delivered or designed this from scratch. So this is truly a co-creation session for all of us. And I really would value your feedback on what worked for you and what particularly perhaps didn't land as clearly as it could have done. So this is pure and utter co-creation with my peers across the world, and it's absolutely great to connect with you. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, but I now have the daunting prospect of pulling up the slideshow, which I will do now. So, hi everybody again, and welcome to this session. You know, for those of us who've been coaching for some years, many years, a few years, the term behavioural dynamics is something that is in tune with everything we are as coaches. We understand behavioural dynamics. There's an awful lot out there around supporting understanding of behavioural dynamics, not least psychometrics, insights, Thomas International, MBTI, all of those really great psychometric tools help us as coaches and help teams understand themselves more from a behavioural perspective. But interestingly, there isn't so much around organisational governance, and actually what indeed does that even mean? I know when I sort of set myself the task of producing this, I was thinking that this is a term, governance, that took me a long time to actually physically understand what it meant and how it applied to the work I do, both with boards, but also in terms of coaching. And as such, I thought, well, if that's a subject that it's taken me a long time to really get to grips with and be able to therefore coach about, then maybe there are other people in the same situation. So that's the purpose of the session. Just to give you a bit of background, Sam's already given you some sense of where I come from. I've spent many years working in leadership and culture change on wide scale change projects and organizations around behavioral change, whether it's towards a sales model or whether it's towards greater stakeholder engagement, whatever it may be. It's all around how teams work together and how they deliver organizational purpose. And about 3 years ago, I moved within Grant Thornton, where I work in London, to a role whereby I was heading up our board evaluation and governance practice, actually leading on board evaluations, which, just so you know, in terms of the requirement for organisations who appear in our FTSE 100 or FTSE 350 stock market listings, the major primary listing, have to do an external board evaluation every 3 years. So therefore, there was a market there that was open, very traditional in its style, and we wanted to bring something that was more about what all of us do, which is actually bringing a developmental future fit lens to board evaluation, so that the board reviews that we were offering were not just about the past and what's happened over the last year to 3 years, but very much around how well is that board set up for the future. This is some of the work that we as executive coaches do. Well, I've been coaching for 25 years. Well, actually, I've been coaching for 30 years, but I always say 25 years just out of habit. But when I made the move into this board evaluation practice, I was confronted by this word governance. And I looked at many different definitions about it, and it seemed incredibly ambiguous. So I thought, well, let's unpack that from a coaching perspective to see whether there's something in there that we can actually help our coachees think about a different way of actually creating high performing team cultures. So we're going to look at governance. What is it? What does it actually mean? We're going to look at this important link between what is good governance and what are good team dynamics. And actually, why bring those two together? We're going to look at benefits of coaching around that, and then do some co-creation together about actually how can you recognize that this subject may be something that might be worthwhile bringing onto the coaching table. And actually, if it is, what are the triggers? What are the signs that are telling you that that's the case? And how can you start to engage in that conversation with your coachee? And finally, we're just going to pull together some outcomes about how we've worked together, what we've gained, and any thoughts really from you around this has landed or this didn't feel really clear and it needs more work. Okay, let's get started. Now, before we go any further, you may have noticed the classic yin and yang sign on the agenda. And that's there very much for a reason, because I do believe that governance and board dynamics together create something that we're going to explore a bit further on.
Karen, I wonder actually, just for my spectacle, can you press full screen on your presentation?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, wonderful. That one was perfect. Thank you.
Is that better?
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Okay, so I don't know how many people are aware of this, but the UK Corporate Governance Code is something that defines how business operates. It actually embraces 5 key principles. Those principles include board leadership and organisational purpose. They embrace the subject of nomination, which is all around succession planning, recruitment to board. They look at the area of composition of the board. So another principle is very much around audit, and both internal audit of control practices and also external audit, and the risks and controls that the business have in place. So those 5 themes, if you like, of the UK Corporate Governance Code are regarded as universally good practice in board governance. And the term that you'll hear, which I'm sure many of you may have heard before, is corporate governance. Corporate governance is how the board should operate if it's operating effectively. It provides the frameworks and it provides the structures for fundamental decision making by the board, which is then fed into the organisation, implemented, and hopefully there's a feedback loop there too, although many board directors and chairs tell me that feedback loop doesn't work particularly well. But actually, those principles, some of which are very pertinent for us as coaches, to think about how the executive directors who work at board level, the CEO and the CFO, how they are operating in a corporate governance space, what legal responsibilities they have. But actually, when I thought about that same code, it didn't feel to me like there were enough resonance between what goes on at board and what goes on in the organisation. So I looked for other definitions. And this one, amongst others, seemed a very helpful one. And it just felt, being in the United Nations, that there was something in this. There's something worth considering for what it tells us. And it says good governance. And let me tell you, there's even less definition around what good governance is, but provides the foundation for a high-performing organisation. It is the process of decision-making and the process by which decisions are implemented or not. So corporate governance as the decision-making that goes on at board, and it includes the non-executive directors and the executive directors working together for the good of the board, its stakeholders, supply chain, people, and of course shareholders. But it's also very much around how the decisions are then taken into the organisation, which is very often where we come in as coaches to help leaders, senior managers take those same decisions and unpack them to think about how operationally they are going to introduce that thinking into the team, how change is going to happen, how growth is going to happen, how performance is going to improve, how that decision is going to be affected by, in the UK, we have a budget this afternoon, and decisions like that are actually impacted by internal and external forces. So good governance is all about looking at the process of decision making. And I think this may help. I really like these 5 principles, either the 5 principles we were talking about in terms of the corporate governance code. Some of them are relevant to the work we do, some of them not so relevant, but I'd really encourage you to get hold of the UK Corporate Governance Code, which you'll see on the right-hand side. It's only about 29 pages long, and it's worth reading with our coaching lens, but it still isn't all relevant to what we do. But I think these United Nations principles are these major characteristics, as they talk about being what is a principle-based approach to governance, whether it's corporate at board or organisational in the business. And I just wonder, as you look at these words aren't always the words that we see in talking about board dynamics. We talk about things like integrity, we talk in values and whatever it may be. But these are quite deep words. Each word in itself has a lot of meaning connected with it. It'd be really great if you could just pop in the chat, and Sam, if you could provide some feedback, that'd be lovely, for what collectively these characteristics are making you think about as a coach. Putting these words, these 8 principles together, and then it's a bit of a cheat because there are 10, because effective and efficient and equitable and inclusive are 4 words, not 2, but they talk about the 8 characteristics. What is this telling you as a coach, that how this might frame a conversation? What are the, if you were to chunk all of these words together, what might they be providing you with in terms of evidence? Anything coming through, Sam?
Great, I've got my eye on the chat, and I'll report back when people drop in a word or two. Let's see, we've got some words being dropped in. So Harriet has said, they're making me think about the global system in which the organisation operates, which is great, isn't it? Bringing out that perspective more wider from where we could start by default. We've got Luca pointing out it's about leadership competencies, which are aligned to all of those. Anna points out diversity. Adrian says accountability is important, and of course, that is one of those 8 there. Eileen says commitment, action, and involvement.
Wow.
Shelley says good management, that's good.
Yeah.
It's good, isn't it, when you see these things and get reminded, oh, that would be good. Pierre says participatory and consensus oriented, with a question, how does this work for Elon Musk?
Oh,
Very timely. Diane says, sounds like the characteristics of good leadership and sustainable leadership, which is a good word to introduce in there. Cheryl says it relates to coaching in terms of integrity, ownership, responsibility, and accountability. Esther says it seems a little abstract and ideal. So maybe there's something here where it's not as pragmatic as it could otherwise be. Claudia saying these principles are for the most part standard team coaching principles, not that's just jumped down as I've been reading it. Not necessarily board governance related, so it's just around teams more broadly. But a related question. I'm just probably going to hold that question because I'm expecting you're going to take this. So we'll hold on to that for later, Claudia. Thank you for that. Nigel says they appear to focus upon the hard stuff and less about the softer stuff, such as respectful interaction and team working. Shirley says it's about safety, containing and reduction of risk. Danny says responsible leadership. I'm nearly at the bottom of the list now, just 3 more. Catherine says transparent and accountable. Cheryl says about, are they aspirational? So back to that idea of them being idealistic. And Mauricio, this is a very interesting one. It sounds like a very Western perspective of governance. I'm wondering what are the elements of good governance mean for the Big South?
Great
comment. Harriet says that consensus seems to be a bit of an odd one, which is, that's a good question to ponder, isn't it? And final one, Esther says it's a good framework, but who ensures all of these qualities? So back to you.
Well, they are aspirational. Thanks, Sam, so much. They are idealistic. And I guess, as coaches, given that we have 100% positive intent for our coachees, it's about bringing this thinking to your coachee in relation to developing different aspects of who they are and what they do. They may agree or not agree with these words. They are definitely something to consider as far as we're concerned from a coaching perspective. And I think they are all the things that you've talked about. And it's really helpful to get a sense that at the very highest level, the United Nations, these principles are the principles that they hold dear. And I couldn't help thinking that I've worked with many boards and have to be honest and say, if I scored some of those boards against some of these characteristics, they would score low. So there is something here about what makes an organization really effective. What is the governance from a perspective of controls, internal audit work, risk management, all of the structural elements of both the board and the organization. These elements are more principles based. These are the things that we hold dear. These are the things that we stand for. So let's go into this in a bit more detail and think about the other point that was made just a moment ago, which is these all feel a bit aspirational and idealistic. And they don't really feel like they're the heart stuff, the behavioral dynamic stuff. Well, I looked at so many different models when I was thinking about this that I realized that Tuckman's as good as any to think about when good governance and behavioral dynamics develop within teams. And I've put here another definition of behavioral dynamics just for us to actually compare the two. So behavioral dynamics, it says, is the internal behavior patterns which motivate or cause the overt external behavior. So in other words, what we think is what we do and what we say and how we are. The behavioral operating characteristics of individuals and groups in terms of how people are conditioned by their working environments and the interactions between individuals or groups in the workplace. I think we'd all agree that those are 3 fairly standard definitions for behavioral dynamics. So the question is, how can governance principles, how can these governance principles work with the natural behavior dynamics of a team in terms of team leadership, and actually whether or not we can bring these two together and recognize that there may be some value in having coaching conversations around these principles. Okay, I'm going to ask you to go into a breakout session now for, let's make it, I think this one's quite a beefy one. So I'm going to give you 15 minutes and I'll just read through while you have time to think about before you go into your breakout rooms, the questions we're looking at. What overarching word or expression might bring governance and behavioural team dynamics onto the same page on a coaching conversation? Think about the leaders that you coach, think about senior managers, whoever they may be. If you were to talk about these two parts of good governance, which is structural, which is all about controls and risk, but it's also about principles, as we've been talking about, and actually the dynamics in the team in which your coachee leads or works, what word would summarize those things coming together if you chunk it up to the next level? What environments might indicate the need to focus attention on the links between good governance and good behavioural dynamics in a coaching conversation? And what three subject areas could be visited as context for the session? So in other words, what three key result areas may you guide your coachee into, or at least ask questions around in an open-minded manner to see what comes out, what deepens their thinking? And only if you have time. Create three context-setting questions that would get the coaching conversation started. So just rather than just a very, very open style of question, something that really would focus the attention of the coachee around the combination of the good governance of the team and behavioural dynamics within the team. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you. Just to sort of reiterate before we go into getting some feedback, that this session is, for those of you who weren't there at the front end, this is something I've created from scratch. It seemed a subject area that when I first started working with boards and executive teams, the whole subject of governance and what it had to do with the organization, I found a mystery. And I thought to myself, being a coach of many years and yet coaching at executive director level, if I don't understand this subject area and what it actually means in terms of the work that executive directors do, then how can I possibly coach successfully? And indeed, if governance is something that is everywhere around the organization, it is a nebulous thing. It can be actually measured through controls and risk assessments and a number of different practices and structures and frameworks within organizations. What else can we do? Because coaching around frameworks and risk controls isn't the most stimulating of work for us as coaches, but there may be other things in there that we can bring to the surface for our coachees. So I'm hoping that this session with you co-creating with me is going to demystify some of the whole subject of governance. So without further ado, it'd be really great to get some feedback from you. I know you've been in different groups. Please just open your mics and let's get some sense of what the discussions brought about. Please, let's start off by the single word that brings together the subject of organisational governance and team or group dynamics. What sort of conversations did you have around that?
How incentives are aligned.
Lovely. Good point in terms of remuneration, both incentives financially and in other words. Thanks, Costas. Yeah. What else?
One of the points we talked about quite a bit is about learning, how we all learn together, how the board learns and how they're able to actually use reflection to actually implement governance, but also be able to disseminate the learning throughout the organization. So they don't let governance take over, let us say, but it's actually learning based.
I think that's a great point. And if we actually change the words from principle based to learning based, I think that sort of changes the lens that we're working on. And I really like that. I like the fact that the system shouldn't drive the behaviors and the principles of which we operate. Thank you. Thank you to that group. What else?
Some words that came from our group, phrases, were sort of what really happens. So that led to fit for purpose, and that sort of got refined further to alignment to intent.
Alignment to intent. Actually, that's a huge area to unpack with a coachee, isn't it? Wow. And even indeed a group. Thanks, Becky. Let's have another couple, and then let's go on to what your thoughts were around the key areas that might trigger this conversation.
Can I come in now? I think from our group, we started off by, for me, it's always about purpose. It's clarity of purpose. And that has a trickle down or a cross effect to every team. So if a board is at the top, or a governance structure is at the top of teams, the clarity of purpose and the values that underpin that purpose. We ended up, talking about what's the brand, what's the flag that you fly above it to tell what this group is there for. And the counter to that is, okay, if it's not there, what does the organization lose? And if it's not there, what does that group or team do that they can't do as individuals? I think it was Claudia who said it's like they're a chair. They're like a team, a governance team, or a group is like a chair in a board, with its own identity, held together by the purpose.
Brilliant.
Everything stems from that.
Nice metaphor. Thanks, Harriet.
Thanks, I propose Claudia. A question. How can we as a board can reconsider business goals given the economic forecasts?
And can you how can we as a business, did you say, or how can we as coaches?
We as a board, and this is a question I would propose as a coach to a board.
I see. And again, Luca, if you could just say that once more. So how can we as a board
reconsider business goals given the economic financial forecast?
Yeah. And I think it's a subject area that is really front of mind as far as most boards are concerned at the moment, in terms of looking forward. The whole subject of how do boards look forward and do good work on strategy at a time when literally the landscape is changing, economic landscape, both globally and locally in our own jurisdictions. What work can we do as coaches to help boards, executive directors and senior managers really help their teams focus on the future? And it's critical, because we have to have a vision of a better place than what we're operating in now. The whole subject, actually, I believe, around vision has been lost a bit when we got overwhelmed with the subject of purpose. Maybe we need to get back to having conversations. Tim?
I feel that if we want to coach successfully, we need to understand contracts in between the individual members of the global team. And if I don't understand what their contracts are, then I can't start actually even going forward in behavioral dynamics.
Absolutely. I think that's a really powerful point. Catherine, one more, and then let's move on to the subject of the key areas that might trigger a conversation. Catherine.
So there's something about this word governance which carries in the mind that it's past looking and not future looking.
Yeah.
And what you're just talking about is governance also includes what we're going to hold account to. So that vision and the kind of conversation. So I think the word governance is problematic in itself.
That's really helpful. Thanks so much. So what we're trying to unpack here is something that is the parlance of leaders and in boards, but at the same time, certain parts of the organization, not least internal audit, risk, whatever it may be, are talking about good governance and making sure the governance frameworks work to protect the organization, the shareholders, the supply chain. ESG measurement is all around governance, but it isn't something necessarily that the whole organization feels comfortable with. So I'm going to pick up that, if I may, Catherine. I think it's a really good insight that we need to hold as far as the rest of this session is concerned. Before we move on, then, just a couple of questions then around what triggers did you discuss in groups, if you did you identify any areas where there may be a need to have coaching conversations? I think growth has come through as one of them. The communication between the board and the organisation seems to be an important one. How transparent is that? How accountable is that? What else?
We talked about defining success, what success is, and thinking forward. And then working backwards where we want to, looking forward where we want to go, and looking what we should be doing today.
So future thinking in terms of the structures, the ways in which we make decisions need to be looking towards the future as well as to protecting the organisation and providing assurance now. Yeah. So I think there's something here, and it might be worth looking up, a model that Sam will smile at, the dilemma model, which I love the acronym because it is the board's dilemma that they're dealing with all the time around governance. Dilemma stands for direction and leadership, DL, management and assurance. And it's a model that we've used for some time, which is very much around what is the board's role and then the executive's role to actually ensure the business operates in a safe and accountable manner now, and equally, what does it need to be thinking about as it moves forward to the next 3 to 5 to 10 years? As we were talking about, this is a very volatile period of time for our existence, business-wise and humanly. So how can we create some stability in the language that we use in terms of building businesses for growth in the future? Checking on the scope of the board, to what extent do they remain non-executive and don't? Yeah, good point. And just very quickly then, before we move into the final stage of this session, be really good to get your thoughts around not just the opening, Sarah, the areas of discussion, but also, you know, thinking about perhaps the questions that you might ask to get that conversation opening up around a leader, for a CEO, for instance, or a CFO, getting them to think about governance principles, the principles that we've been talking about. What conversations, what questions did you come up with in that respect? So what would be good, just as we close this session before we go into the next bit, is to just get any further thoughts, any real insights that you found as part of your discussion group. Anything else that's worth sharing before we move on?
Hi, Karen. Yeah, that's working perfectly. There have been 1 or 2 questions that have come in the chat. Do you want to deal with those now, or would you like to wait until?
Should we, if it's okay, can we hold them to the end of the session? Because as you know, Sam, I have to dip off. Apologies, everybody. I've been pulled into a pitch at dead on 12 noon, which I've tried every which way to get out of. But Sam will be with you, and he has a wealth of experience in this area too, because we worked together for some time. But let's move on and find some time for questions at the end before I leave. This is a new couple of models that I've put together, and I'm just really keen to get a sense of whether these resonate for you. So what we're looking at here is the difference between the internal governance of a senior team in terms of its principles, not just the hardwired framework systems and processes, but what is emanating from this team. And equally, what are the external forces, if you like, that are impacting this team from outside? And I don't mean just outside the team in the organization, I mean in the wider world. So you can see on the left-hand side that I have taken those 8 characteristics of what the UN regard as idealistic, aspirational governance. These are the mindset, if you like. This is the identity of a group of individuals, whether it be the UN, whether it be a board of directors, whether it be a senior team in an organization. These are the aspirations of a highly effective governance decision-making body. Now, how does that have any relevance whatsoever to teams in organizations? Well, it has a lot of relevance, because when we look at, when we're group coaching, the effectiveness of a team, we tend to focus our frames on key areas that a lot of people talk about. And those key areas tend to sit to the right-hand side of your screen. What is the organization's purpose? What are its values? What is the defined culture? What do you recognize as the behavioral norms? And indeed, on the left-hand side, how clear is the strategy for everybody about where the business is going? These are all formulated to inform the organization, to inform the shareholders of the organization's intent, to help the supply chain and the organization's people to really understand the holistic framework, the system in which everybody operates, if you like. But what is not so well understood is, alongside that, what do we stand for as a team? One of the things I've done a lot of work with over the years is helping teams to recognize they also need their own identity. That is not by any means undermining the business purpose or the values and culture of the organization, but sitting alongside that are a group of individuals with different behavioral profiles, with different experiences, different characteristics, different levels of interaction, cliques, areas of difference, whatever it may be. And it's actually, how do we bring that team together? So how can the governance of this team that we're talking about, alongside the external forces that are influencing it and how it behaves, how can this team own its own governance principles, its means of making decisions? I don't know about you, but the two things I watch when I'm observing teams, senior teams at work, are one, the quality of interactions, the dynamics in the room, and two, the quality of meetings. Both for me are very, very telling in terms of how those two factors work. So the third one we're going to add to that, the behavioral dynamics, the quality of the meetings, is this key area of governance, the quality of decision making. And I'd like you to think now, as I'm talking to you, about how much work you as a coach has done around helping your coachee to think about the quality of decision making in their own teams and at the board, or indeed in the wider teams. And for me personally, I haven't done a lot of thinking about the quality of decision making, how decisions are taken. I used to use De Bono's 6 thinking hats as a means of decision making, but it's something that's really triggered in my mind, that if the 3 areas of effectiveness can be defined as board dynamics or team and group dynamics, quality of meetings and quality of decision making, what do we need to consider to actually be able to identify, for a leader to be able to identify the qualities of decision making that his team have and the disciplines that they adopt in order to make the decision and implement the decision and feed it back into the team? So one side is what's emanating out, the intrinsic nature of the team, about being consensus centered. Another word we would use there is collaborative. Accountable to one another. This is all about the team and its good governance. Transparent to one another. No cliques, no hidden agendas in the team. Responsive to one another in terms of getting back and providing thinking, thought leadership, whatever it may be within the team that helps the team to grow. That team, how effective and efficient is it? And how accountable are they to one another? I coach teams regularly, and individuals tell me that actually they feel very hard done by. They're getting the lion's work, or the most of the work is being delegated to them because they're known to be the can-do person that has a completer finisher tendency. So is the level of work that's being done equitable? Is it inclusive? Are we always introducing our whole team to new concepts? Are we really bringing in people who don't necessarily either pull their weight, or as coaches, are we helping leaders to look at how they might increase diversity in the team, improve inclusiveness of the team? And above all, are we as coaches helping our leaders, our coachees, to understand that there are rules, legal rules, employment law rules that need to be considered around diversity and inclusion, around the number of different groups in which we work, a whole raft of stuff that's going on around ESG, if that means anything to you, environmental, social and governance reporting at top end of the business. So on the left-hand side, what we stand for as a team, alongside, on the right-hand side, the influences, the messaging, the vision, the purpose, the values that our organisation holds dear. So this is the model that works inside out, outside in. I'd like you to go back, if you would now, and explore this model. And I'm going to give you just 10 minutes through to 22:12 to think about these two things. What benefits can our coaches gain from exploring each of these two perspectives? The inside out, from the team outwards, how do we stand? How do we work together? What is our purpose? And the outside in, the influence. I don't know about you, but I work with many businesses that have had the same values for years, and values are very difficult to actually articulate within the organisation and make real, as is culture. So how could you use these two models, if you like, these two ways of thinking, these two, to use NLP language, the two parts and the part separation to create integration? And how could you use these in models in a coaching conversation? You've got 10 minutes in breakout groups now to think about those models and how you might use each and every one of them. What different ways could we use them for coaching conversations? Great. So let's just have a quick roundup then on some of the discussions that you've been having around this subject of these two models and whether actually they make any sense at all. And if so, how would you use them in a coaching session? Who'd like to go first from their group? So it's Ngozi.
Yeah. Okay.
Hey, go for it. Yeah.
Hi. Thank you very much. We found that there were great modules, and we are looking at the impact of the COVID and the post-COVID. And these models, they are interrelated. The simulations should consider each other. We are looking at, if I look at the three pillars, the governance, the leadership, and the culture. The governance, the leadership should leverage the values of that governance that is innovative, responding to the post-COVID scenario. So they cannot just remain with the modules that this is what we have said, that's what is going to happen. There are changes and they need to innovate along as it changes. Then on the culture, the people also have to have an intentional mindset shift to adapt to the innovative changes that leadership might bring in. So if they're interrelated, they have to support each other for them to be meaningful. And for us as coaches, is now to get leadership to know that it's not a one fixed affair. It is simulating scenarios and keep reviewing and changing those scenarios to respond to the situations which are very fast changing.
Ngozi, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. Graham.
Hi. Yes, I'll try and capture what was quite a rapid fire bunch of ideas, really, I think. So I'll get the rest of the team to chip in. The first one, okay, so we asked the question, first of all, why would you actually want to use these two models as opposed to more of a standard systemic coaching model? And we actually saw a lot of value in that. I think we all saw that. The big thing is about using a language that the board members will connect with. It's so important to meet the client where they actually are. And coaching language sometimes can, I've certainly had to check myself a number of times, can be seen as a little bit woo-woo and out there. but particularly to board members who are really focused on, we've got to get this right, and this is how it happens, and we don't do all this deep thinking stuff. We just need to get into action. So it's a really good checklist, if you like, of being able to ask some of those difficult questions, and you could actually go easily turn it into a 6-month coaching program of looking at each of those areas and asking questions of what can you do as a team in each of these areas. What can you achieve as a team that you cannot achieve in isolation?
Yeah.
And then from the other side of the model, you can go further and say, well, what does the future require of us to develop that we can't do in isolation? So you could open this out in pretty much any direction you wanted to. And the other thing as well is it provides an opportunity to use some of those things to get the language right for communications. Yeah. And I use an old example of if you showed everybody in this room a very short film and then asked them to each describe their feelings, emotions, and the technical bits of what they actually saw and can remember, you'd end up with as many different versions as you can people. So that it becomes so important to get the language right and check on that. So yeah, great tool.
Terrific insights. Thank you, Graham, very much. Thank you. Claudia, or was it Claudia? Sorry.
Yeah, so we actually took a more fundamental view, not even getting to the models, and I apologize for that. The boards are by their very nature very diverse. They are brought together because of their wealth of experience, their difference of opinions, the way that they look at the future and the time horizons and so on. And a lot of times, actually, they're very big egos as well. Yes. which I mean, it's the nature of the beast, really. And some of them are actually executives in their own right, and are very much used to that kind of operational work as well. Mm-hmm. So we were asking, so what is actually a coach? When does a coach actually even get in there? Because there's obviously a fertile ground for conflict and things like that, and stuff getting out of hand and not staying on task. So if there is not somebody with a coaching mindset in the room that can kind of bring this kind of hold the space in coaching lingo, set and hold the space, get people to agreement, soften the blows, turn down the temperature a little bit when appropriate, coaching, probably self-coaching, is not going to happen, or is likely not to happen. So obviously, if it comes from within, that would be a very nice thing. An external coach can actually, I think, be very beneficial to hold the board to the task at hand and to deal with those conflicts that can arise. Yes, we just jumped so much, and then, but one key point was also that there needs to be a very strong exchange between the board and the company. The board and the executive branch of the company, and words that floated in the room were trust, accountability, information flow, and so on. So we jumped quite a bit, and if I didn't capture it, my breakout mates can maybe comment as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia, so much. I mean, this is rich outputs for me to think about, and I just wonder, we've got a couple more minutes. I'm going to bring up the final slide, but it seems to me there is something here that's coming through. Some themes are coming through clearly. Those of us on this meeting, many of us have got experience of working with boards, with executive directors, and there is something here about language, as Graham was talking about, as Claudia was talking about meeting your coachee in their world, so that we aren't tarred with that. I don't hear it so often now, soft and fluffy brush that sometimes gets mentioned, and other derivatives, definitions. There's something here about really getting to grips with the language, and at the same time bringing back this point of governance is not just about structures. It's not around what the various different papers that articulate the framework of decision making for the board, such as authorities, responsibilities, and all of that good stuff. It is actually about how you show up, who you are, how you work together. And it's these characteristics that can be measured and should be measured by boards and should actually inform the way they think about the culture in the organization. It's fascinating. We do a corporate governance review every year. You can download it off on the internet, corporate governance review from Grant Thornton. And whilst we're seeing culture tracking far more effectively and increasing the percentage in terms of how FTSE boards are reporting on culture measurement, they still aren't really articulating how coaching or how culture really can be manifested, how it can be measured. And I think that's because they don't even really understand yet how to measure the behaviors, the interactions, and the quality of decision-making processes at board. And I absolutely take the feedback that you've passed on, which is it should start at the board first. And they're ultimately responsible and accountable as a group in terms of those dynamics. Let me just, I know there's some questions that have come through. I'm mindful that I haven't picked up those questions, and I know Sam's going to pick them up for me. What I've finally done is to go back and think about, over my years of experience of coaching, what are the models that I use as frameworks for discussion. I don't necessarily use them to direct the conversation, but they prompt me into thinking about different ways of framing conversation. Force field analysis, 1938, I think it was. It's a great model thinking about what we're talking about now, both the internal and external forces of what's happening in organizations and what the pressures are that boards are grappling with and the context that boards are grappling with. You'll see well-formed outcomes, an NLP model there. You'll see Maslow there in terms of the hierarchy of needs. And of course, neurological levels and Lencioni. And right in the center here, alongside SWOT, chunking up and chunking down, chunking to the bigger picture, getting down into the detail. Many NEDs deal a lot in that bottom level of specific detail and data, when really the quality of the board discussion, which informs decision making, should be at the much higher level. And excuse me, but I know there was Luca and somebody else that was, is it Margaret, who were talking about just that from an experience of working with NEDs. So I'm going to stop sharing and just pass over to you, Sam, now to think about how we bring this session to a close and what particular questions may be of use. And I'll hang around for a couple more minutes.
Brilliant. Well, Catherine, oh my goodness, what on earth? What were you? So I met somebody called Catherine in the group earlier, and something that she said with me. Karen, it's been great having the time with you. And so before we go into any question, in fact, it's nearly 5:02. Sure, you need to go, don't you? So can we just everybody show your thanks to Karen? Maybe come off mute and make as much noise as you can. That would be great to say thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you
so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. That was fantastic.
Karen.
Thanks so much, everybody. It's been great. And consider, I must just quickly mention to you, I did mention this before I started. This is the very first time I've ever opened this conversation up before. I was quite anxious about whether or not there was any value in it. And I just feel that there may well be some value in this. And if anybody has anything further, please do contact me. I would really be interested to hear your thoughts. I think some of the feedback's been great. Over to you, Sam.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you everybody for being so included and so active in the conversation. It's been great to hear lots of different voices, and thanks, Karen, for providing such rich content to trigger our thinking and interactions in the breakout rooms as well.